Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to learn more about how to validate the values that users enter into our forms. Let's jump into the action. So in addition to validation, we're also going to learn how to enhance the user experience when it comes to filling out this form. So in other words, remember if you leave a field blank, it's not actually going to create the account. It's going to kick you back to this same page, right? Instead of redirecting you to /register. Well, in that situation, we would want to display a message, a red error message right about here saying, you must provide a username. So before we worry about enhancing the user experience and actually showing those messages, let's first just set up those actual specific rules for validating the data. So back in VS Code, let's open up app, the app folder, and then HTTP, controllers, and jump into usercontroller.php with me. Cool. Let's start around line 12 with the username field. So here we have an associative array, right? This is the label, this symbol, and then this is the value. For the value, instead of just a single value like a string of text, let's actually get rid of that and give it an array that will contain multiple values. So in the square brackets, we can say, quotes required, it is necessary, but comma, we can spell out other rules. So for example, you could say quotes and then say like min:4 or 3. Let's say 3, right? Your username needs to be at least 3 characters long. Comma, and then you could say quotes max. Let's say your username can't be more than 30 characters long or 20 characters long. After the quotes, comma, let's have one more rule and say that your username must be unique. In other words, Laravel will look in our database table and see, is there any other row that has this value for the username column? If so, don't let the user register, right? Your username must be unique. So here's how you could set that up in Laravel. So in our array comma, we can have another value, only it's not going to be a simple string of text like these first 3 rules. Instead, we would say uppercase rule. This is a Laravel class that we're going to leverage. So : to use a static method from a class. And then it has a method called unique, so parentheses to actually call that. Now in these parentheses, we give it 2 arguments, so a, b as placeholders. The first argument is the name of the table in your database, so quotes, our database table is named users, right? If you look in SQL Workbench, right? The name of the table over here, users, okay? The second argument, instead of the b placeholder, is the name of that field or column. So quotes, we named it username. Cool. Now, however, if we're going to use this built-in Laravel class of rule, we need to be sure to import this up at the top of our file, right? Because if you go look up at the top, we're only importing so far our user model and Laravel's HTTP request class. Now, if you followed along and installed that VS Code extension with me, all you need to do is right-click on this uppercase rule and choose Import Class. Now you can see there's a few different options to choose from. We want this first one, or the one that's illuminate /validation /rule. Just click on that. Perfect. It should look like this. We're ready to go. Before we save this and test it out, let's go ahead and set up the more specific rules for email and password as well. So for the email value, instead of just quotes required, let's get rid of that. The value would be square brackets, an array. So let's start out with quotes required, but then a comma. Let's say quotes, it must be in the pattern or format of an email address, right? So a string and then the @ symbol and then another string. Cool, let's add a comma, another rule. Let's say that it must also be unique, right? There can only be one user account in the entire database with that particular email address. So it would just be uppercase rule, : call the unique method. Inside that, we give it 2 arguments. So the first is the table, users. The second argument is the name of the field or column. So quotes, it would not be username, it would be email. Cool, and then let's do the same thing for password. So instead of just quotes, it would be array, say quotes, it is required, comma. Let's say that your password needs to be at least 6 characters long. I would recommend setting it to at least 8 or even 12 for enhanced security, right? The longer the password, the more secure it is. So it's up to you, but just to get the idea across, let's say maybe min:8, comma, and then check this out. If you say quotes confirmed, This is how Laravel can automatically make sure that what they type in this field matches what they type in this field. Now, in order for this to work without us doing anything extra, let's go ahead and save this file. And you need to make sure that if you open up your view file, so in VS Code, instead of navigating into the resources and the views folder, you can just press Control P on Windows or Command P on Mac and just type in homepage.blade.php, right? So if you just start to search for it, press enter, cool, we're in that file. Now what I wanted to show you is that down around line number 27, this is the bit of code for that second confirmation field for the password. On the input name, it can't be password, right? That's the name for the initial password. For this one, it needs to be password, and then do this with me. Change it to password underscore, and then it needs to be confirmation. So essentially, as long as you add underscore confirmation onto the name, this could be anything we chose, right? This could be pizza here, and then this would just be pizza underscore confirmation. Laravel will know where to look, and it will give us that confirmation, validation feature without us doing anything extra. Cool. Let's go ahead and save both of these files and test it out, right? So if you refresh, if I choose a username with only, 2 characters like AB, and then I enter in a valid email address, and then I enter in a password that's long enough, try to sign up, it should fail because the username is not, 3 characters at least. Cool, it sends me back. However, if I fill out the form perfectly and hit submit, cool, it sends me to /register, it works, and if you refresh your database for the users table, there you see the new item. Cool. At this point, let's do a few different things. So before we worry about, actually, if I go back to the home page, before we worry about showing the validation error messages above a field, let's first make sure that we are absolutely not storing the plain text password value for users in the database. This is one of the absolute worst things you could ever do from a security standpoint. Because if your database is ever compromised, you just leaked the password of all of your users. So right away, let me show you what we should do instead. Back in user controller, on this line, this is where we would actually be saving that item into the database. So right before that line, right, before we save the fields into the database like this, let's just modify the password value. So check this out. Do this with me. I would say $incoming fields, right? That's what we named our variable here. And then square brackets, we want to look inside that associative array, quotes, for the item in the array where its label is password. Cool. Now we're going to set that to equal, and then, you could just set it to a string of text, but we don't want to do that. What we want to do is take whatever value the user actually typed into that field and then hash it with something called bcrypt. Now, this is another reason why I love Laravel. If we were using Node.js and Express, we would have to load in, go to npm and install bcrypt ourselves and make that decision. With Laravel, we don't need to do anything. There's just a globally available function. We can just say bcrypt, call it semicolon, in the parentheses, you would just give it the password value that they actually typed in. So that would be $incoming fields, square brackets, to look inside that array, quotes, the item where the label is password. So essentially whatever the user typed in, we're hashing it using a tool called bcrypt, and then that's what we're entering, right? We're saying that should equal. We're making that be the actual password value so that when we pass incoming fields into this function call, that's what will actually get stored in the database. So you can save this and now test this out. So you could fill out the form again. I'll say, meows a lot at google.com. Choose a password that is at least 8 characters long. Sign up. Cool. It took us to /register. It was successful. If you look in the database, though, if you refresh the table view for users table, cool, there's meows a lot, but most importantly, check out the password field. So it hashed, again, just so you know, I typed in QWERTY, only it hashed it. Now, in case you're wondering, hashing is not the same as encrypting and decrypting, right? Because when you encrypt something, that implies that it can be decrypted. A hash is a one-way street. So the metaphor that I like for understanding a hash, it's like if you took a piece of paper and then burned it and it was just ashes, you can't put the ashes back together again to form the piece of paper, right? Whatever you had written down on the piece of paper and then burned it, it's a one-way street. There's no getting it back. So that's what's going on when you hash a value. So now when the user tries to log in, Laravel has, or the database I should say, it has no idea what the actual password value is. But the hashing algorithm can say, okay, I'm going to compare, whatever value they're trying to log in with, I'm going to compare that with this value using the similar hashing algorithm. And if it's a match, then let them in, let them log in, right? It was the correct password. So it's a really cool way of us not really needing to know the actual password value of our users. Right? I'll still be able to log in with QWERTY. We're just not storing it in the database. Cool. Let's change gears now. So let's go back. Now let's actually work on displaying. So if you filled out the form incorrectly, right, we should actually display the error messages like username must be at least 3 characters or username is required. And really quick, before we set that feature up in our view template, let me first show you a typo I made. So for our username rules, it would be max : and then don't have a space right here, just :20. Cool. At this point, let me show you how you would set up the red error messages. And the cool part is that Laravel will make up the message for you. So for example, we don't need to write the sentence that says username must be at least 3 characters. This is the beauty of using Laravel's rule system like this. Laravel will come up with the human readable, error message sentence for us. So do this with me. Go into your homepage blade.php file. And for me, it's around line number 11, right? The div for the username field. How about below the label and the input? So below this input element, but still in the overall div, the form group div for that field. So right here, where my cursor is right now, do this with me. Say @error. Remember, in a Blade template, the @ symbol is how you can run a directive or command like this. And then below that, we'll say @end error. But in between those two, so right about here, we could, open up an HTML paragraph. And just so it looks nice, we could say class equals m-o for no margin, small for the text size, alert -danger, that's just a few bootstrap classes, and maybe shadow-sm for a small shadow. But here's the cool part. Right about here where you would actually, include your message text, let's just say double pair of curly brackets, right, to do something dynamic in a Blade template, and then just $message. If you're wondering where this is coming from, Laravel will provide this for us within the error directive area like this. So we don't even need to make up the message text. Check this out. If I save that and refresh, whoops, and I got about 5 steps ahead of myself. I was way too excited to show you how easy this is to set up. On this directive line, when we say, we're starting the error section like this, it's parentheses, and then you supply the name of the field that you're working with, right? So quotes, this would be the username field. So when we do this below, that would be, email or password. But for this one, we're working with the username field. Sorry about that. I get really excited when showing features like this in Laravel because if you've ever worked with Node.js and Express, setting something like this up would be a lot of work. But with Laravel, this is so easy. I love this. So if we go ahead and save, refresh, and purposefully submit the form incorrectly because we know that you need a username. Awesome. We see, let me zoom in a little bit for you. The username field is required. And if you include just a value, remember it needs to be at least 3 characters long. If you put just 2 letters and click sign up, you get, the username must be at least 3 characters. This is awesome. We didn't need to manually spell out these sentences. Laravel just does that for us. Now let's go do the same thing for these other remaining fields. So back in our code, for the email field, for me it's around line number 21, right about here. Below the input, and you would even just copy and paste these 3 lines to save typing, just paste it here. The only difference would be for these parentheses, this argument value, this would just be quotes email. And then just scroll down, do the same thing for password. So below the input right about here, just change the argument to password. And then do the same thing for password confirmation. So below the input, change this to password_confirmation. Cool. You can go ahead and save that. And now, no matter how you fill out the form incorrectly, you can see if you submit them blank, all of the fields are required. Or, let me fill this out. If I fill it out correctly, except for the fact that my 2 password values don't match, I can try to sign up, and we see Well, whoops, the username was already been taken, but we also see the password confirmation does not match. This is awesome. Now let's take it one step further. You might know from various websites, it's super frustrating when you fill out a form and it takes you a good minute to fill it out, and then you lose all of your values that weren't problematic. So imagine you only had the password error, but now you have to retype in your username and email. That's super annoying. It would be nice if Laravel would make these values sort of sticky or persistent, right? If it would remember your good values when the page reloads. Well, check this out. All you need to do to set that up is use something called the old value. Let's start with our username. So if you scroll back up, on the actual input for username, let's just give it an additional attribute of value, right? So it doesn't matter where, if it's before name or if it's at the very end of the element tag, but you just say value equals quotes, and then this is how you would provide a hard-coded or initial value. Like if I say okay and then refresh, you see that here. So instead what you can do, instead of hard-coded, just say quotes and then double curly brackets in a Blade template. And then we have this helper function called old. So old and then parentheses to call it. As you might have guessed, in the parentheses it would be quotes and then the field in question. So it would be username, just like this. Now, in order to save a bunch of typing, I would just take value equals to the end of the quotes, copy that, and then just paste it for the email field. So right about here. And then you could use it for any fields in your form, except Laravel is not going to provide the old value functionality for passwords, right? Just for security reasons, Laravel is not going to store your actual plain text password value, even in session like this. So let's just set up username and email. Whoops. On the email field, this should be the argument in quotes. This should be email. Awesome. Let's go ahead and save it and test it out. So I won't bore you with it, but let me fill out this form. And everything is correct except for the fact that, imagine I have a typo and the passwords don't match. I sign up. Awesome. We see that error message, but we don't lose these values. So it remembers our old value. And then you just have to type in, correct password values. And if you sign up, awesome. It went through successfully, and if you refresh your database view, cool, there is that newest record that I just added. So the question becomes, where do we go from here? Well, now that we've set up this basic validation, in our next lesson, we're going to ask the question, how would you actually let a user log in, right? So it's the concept of authentication, or how do we trust that a user is actually logging in with the correct username and password? And then if they are logged in, how do you let them log out? And perhaps most importantly, once they're logged in, how do we show them a different homepage, right? We would no longer want them to see this guest homepage for this homepage URL. So we're going to get started answering all of those sorts of logging in and authentication and logging out questions in our very next lesson. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you then.